and welcome to Chopper Talks, episode number 9. I am Father Alan McDonald, and we had quite a few things happening this past week. We'll be talking about the fallout from Canada's Parliament of honouring a real, actual Nazi. We'll be talking about Father Aultman again, and going off the rails. And last but not least, we'll be talking about the massive mess that's GB News at the moment. We'll be talking about all those things and my reflections as we carry on. Just when you think the Canadian government couldn't muck things up any more than they already have, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, says, "Here, hold my beer. I'll make it even better." Now, some background information is really important in this. You might remember 2 years ago, a whole bunch of truckers and a number of other Canadians were protesting the level of COVID restrictions, the fact that the Canadian government was holding on to a lot of these restrictions when the necessity of it passed away. I would argue didn't really need them in the first place, but that's a different story. But the point is, Canadians were getting fed up, and they decided to show it. Now, fundamentally, in a democracy, the right to protest is sacrosanct. You cannot mess with it. But this government not only decided to mess with it by declaring the Emergencies Act and calling in the police to break up protesters when they finally arrived in Ottawa, he froze their bank accounts, and he called them Nazis, and even went to the extreme for one of their ministers to have the magical honk honk to be a code word for Heil Hitler. Got a little video collection just to remind you all.
Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag.
I, like many Canadians, were shocked to see Nazi flags, Confederate flags, dismayed and angry and hurt.
Now, I remind you of all this because, as I'm sure you all know now, that precisely when I was recording this program last Friday, the Canadian Parliament decided to honor a real Nazi.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
Sounds all great. We're honoring a Ukrainian patriot fighting against Russian occupation in World War II. Just one little problem. This gentleman, Yaroslav Honka is his name, as any Google search could have shown you, was a member of the 14th Galicia Division of the Waffen-SS. Now, he wasn't just an ordinary Nazi. That would have been bad enough. He was very much at the spear point of nastiness. And he wasn't indicted directly in any war crimes after his capture or when he came to Canada. But let's be frank, you simply could not be a member of that organization. He volunteered when he was 18 and not somehow be involved in the many horrible things that happened in the Eastern Front. Give you a point of example. The SS had 4 divisions called the Einstein-Gruppen, and what their specific job was, after the regular German army had came through, they would come in behind, do the roundups of communists, Jews, and any other undesirables, take them into an open pit, and literally kill them, shoot them en masse. Thousands were killed in that way. And this division was very much a part of those kind of operations of rounding up people they were executing. One of the things this specific division was involved with was the rounding up and executing of Polish civilians, which is now why Poland wants to try to extradite them to put them on trial for war crimes. I remember this specifically because growing up in Canada in the 1980s, it was the discovery that a lot of these members came to Canada under duplicitous circumstances, basically lying about their membership in the SS, and tried to live normal Canadian lives in the 1980s and beyond. This gentleman now is well into his 90s. But as time went on, nothing came of it, and it just carried on. A couple of things are really important here. First off, I want to talk about the ramifications of this. The fallout is still going on as we speak. The speaker, as the time of this is being aired, has since resigned. He has lost his job. But so far, that seems to be it. I think there needs to be a lot more consequences to this action. Somebody in the Speaker's office, and I dare to say, in the Prime Minister's office, royally messed up and didn't do their proper research. You shouldn't be getting into spitting distance of any head of government in Canada or head of state in Canada without having a thorough background check. Something was not done that should have been done. Now, there's been rumblings as well about having a vote of no confidence. I'm skeptical of anything is going to come of that, simply because the NDP, which is the third party of the Canadian Parliament, is in virtual lockstep with the Liberals, and they're going to be holding out until at least October 2025, when there will be an election coming forward. Essentially, there's two things to reflect on in all of this. First, I know karma is not a Catholic teaching. It is not part of God's plan. But God does have a sense of humor. And this is a perfect example of God's fabulous sense of humor. It's also a reminder that we have to be very careful in the words we use. We should not be using inflammatory language. We should not be using language to divide people. We should not be using language to puff other people up or bring especially other people down, because God will find a time for that to come back and bite you on the backside. Paul clearly reminds us of this when he says in Ephesians, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." Proverbs carries on when it says, "Sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent holding of your tongue." The second point I want to make in all of this, and this is a personal message to Yaroslav Hunka. Sir, you are in your 90s. You are not far away from coming face to face with God. You will be held account for your actions. I am begging you, as a Christian, please go to confession if you haven't done so already. Repent of whatever you have done, because you might succeed in hiding up to this time, but you cannot hide from God's final justice. Please seek the mercy of God before it's too late. Right, Father James Aultman has done it again. He, besides going on his usual rant about Pope Francis not being the Pope, he used a line from Jesus saying that anyone who corrupts these little ones would be better to have a millstone thrown around his neck. I'll let him speak for himself here.
and how the best, people get mad at me because they say I'm just angry all the time, but the best thing we could do would be to tie the great millstone around Jorge Bergoglio's neck and throw him into the deep blue Mediterranean Sea.
Now, the fact that you're willing to say this about any human being, not to mention the Holy Father, shows just how far off the train tracks you have fallen. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Pope Francis is the Pope. The Church is a human and divine institution. And to address this, Father Paul Kalchik on Twitter reposted an article he wrote back in February. You can find it on the Church Militant website, which I strongly advise everyone to read, which tells people, just calm down. Don't let whatever the synod comes out disturb your peace, because whatever comes out will not change the fundamental teachings of the Catholic faith. The Church is a human and divine institution, and anyone that tries to do that will run smack dab into the brick wall called the Holy Spirit. So, have faith, my friends. Things are well in God's hands. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the whole kerfuffle going on at GB News. I didn't really want to talk about it. I didn't plan on talking about it. But with the announcement of first the removal of Lawrence Fox and Dan Wooten from GB News, and now the suspension of Calvin Robinson, it's hitting just a little too close to home. An important disclaimer I need to make here. I've met Calvin Robinson quite a few times. We've had pictures together. We've both been on pro-life rallies and marches together. So I know him and he knows me. I'm also good friends, and I hope he considers myself as a friend, with Connor Tomlinson. He's going to be part of this too in a minute. So it's important I get that out in front. This is all in response to a journalist named Ava Santina. You don't really have to scratch her very hard, just for some of her Twitter feeds to a number of her broadcasts, to say she is quite a hater of men. She doesn't like men very much. And this is just one example with involves my friend Connor Tomlinson, where they're talking about the Me Too movement.
That is one of my worries, that for teenage boys now, they are so terrified of the consequences of putting a foot out of line. It was hard enough being a young teenager, working out how things are, working out how to do dating and all of that, without the terror that if you touch in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may find that your whole life is destroyed.
See, I
and there
like
is
that
far
terror.
too much. Well,
I like that.
As a
I
mother
think
of
that
a
men
teenage
should be
boy, I
frightened.
don't like
Really?
that
That's
terror.
the most
I do.
malicious thing I've ever heard.
That is
I think that
awful.
men should be frightened
I think
to
you'd
touch
feel
women in a way
differently
that
if you
they're
were,
not comfortable with.
But with good boys are all terrified. I know that from talking to my son. He's just like, I'm just not going there. Is that healthy?
Yes, I
The
think
other
it is
point-
actually. I think it's better to not have a physical relationship than to have one that could ruin a woman's life.
But then how do they ever start?
Well, don't. If you're not 100%
Don't.
sure,
What are we going
don't.
for?
What are you going to have? A bunch of neutered
Celibate.
boys who
But
never
it's
had...
so obvious.
We
actually do have that.
Gen
Z is having far less sexual relationships
Yes,
than any
they
ever before.
are. It's true.
And
young
hang
people
on.
have stopped having sex.
I agree with the first part of your sentence, actually. If you're not willing to have a sexual relationship with clearly defined lines, don't have one. And so I actually told my mates at university, don't sleep around with girls. One, girls don't bring a guy home that you don't know what he's capable of. Two, guys, don't bring a girl home if you think that possibly she could have a false accusation against you.
She got onto the radar of Lawrence Fox when, at a BBC politics program, she was sort of discounting the idea of a ministry for men, just like we have a ministry for women. And this is in response to the alarmingly high suicide rates among young men. An important fact here. If you are a man under 50, you are more likely to die from a suicide than you are from anything else. I find that quite an alarming statistic, and just shows how spiritually lost a lot of men are. But even in this context, many people, when they bring about this, they want to bring this into the feminist fold. It's really an attempt to feminize men. Now, let's be clear. There's nothing wrong with being feminine at all in women, not in men. Men are uniquely created, and they have their own needs as well. And this is just something a lot of the feminist movement doesn't seem to get. But in response, when he was asked for his response to this, Lawrence Fox responded in what I can only describe in an incredibly immature way, basically saying that I wouldn't have sex with this woman, which I'm not going to repeat the what he really said, because it's just so silly. It's not the worst thing I've ever heard in the world of broadcasting, but it would certainly rank up there as one of the most immature statements. And Dan Wooten, just sitting back and giggling as he was saying this, just sort of reveals this is more likely what you'll find about two guys in a pub as opposed to in a broadcast program. So Dan Wooten's apologized, GB News has apologized. All of that is fitting and proper. Suspending them both might be a bit over the top. Some would disagree, but that's not really the point I wanted to make here. The point of all of this is very much an idea that starts in the 60s, has sort of developed up until the point we have now. And that's the idea that men and women are in competition. They're in competition for power, they're in competition for attention. But that's not the way God made us. Right in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27, it says, "And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." Men and women are not meant to be in competition. They're meant to be complementary. There are some things men are good at, as opposed to women. There are other things that women are much better at, as opposed to men. When men and women work together, that complementarity comes out and is a brilliant display of the human condition. But once we had the idea of competition, men and women are in competition, fighting for that sphere of power, we're getting all of the dysfunctions of that idea that men and women should be in competition. We have single-parent families, absentee fathers, fathers not taking responsibility for their children. The idea, there was a shirt I remember a few years back saying, "Boys are stupid, throw rocks at them," and this was meant for girls. In a lot of television programs that you see, you have the role of men either as A, stupid, or B, evil. That's deliberately made to puff up one side and bring down the other. Generally, we can't go on like this. We have to go back to the church, the gospel, and the idea of complementarity between men and women. They are both equal in the eyes of God, equal in the love of God, but they are different. It's an unpopular truth, but it's still the truth nonetheless. That's all I have for you today. Thank you and God bless you. Remember to like this program and like my channel if you want to see more of my videos and my homilies. And I'll see you all next week, God willing. God bless you.